Hey guys, Aaron with Garrett's Custom and Outdoors here. Today we're going to be talking about fishing line. If you're new to fishing, or like me a few years ago getting back into fishing, and you discover that there are all these fishing line options that weren't there before, this video is for you. Today we're specifically focusing on monofilament. Monofilament's been around since the 1950s. It was invented in the 30s by DuPont, I think. That's not important. For about 40 years, monofilament was the predominant fishing line. That's what everybody's using for almost everything. Up until about 20-ish years ago, Dyneema and Spectra microfiber braided fishing lines, the super lines, started to take over. But monofilament still has its time and place. It's not good for everything, but there are some things where actually monofilament is the line of choice, and that's what we're going to discuss today. There are many benefits to monofilament, and the first one is the price. Monofilament is cheap. Monofilament costs pennies for $1 worth of super braid or even fluorocarbon leader material. Monofilament is easy to use. The knots are simple. You often don't have to tie on a leader or use leader material like you do with braid. For the casual fisherman or somebody just getting back into fishing, you might want to start with monofilament. Compared to fluorocarbon, monofilament is more buoyant. Fluorocarbon sinks very quickly, so if you're float fishing or using topwater lures, monofilament might be your go-to choice for a leader or as a main line, whereas fluorocarbon, because it's denser, will sink, and it makes float fishing really difficult because your line is now sinking, going up to your float, and that's kind of not what you want. That just adds a whole lot of problems. Now for topwater fishing like the Zara spook here, fluorocarbon will do the same thing. It's sinking, pulling down, and making the bait not swim as well, and making the bait not swim like it's supposed to. So there again, monofilament would be your leader material of choice. Something that I want to mention, kind of get it out of the way, is there are now a lot of hybrid lines, copolymers, where they blend the materials together and then extrude it. Fused materials, where they'll have one line of, I believe they do monofilament first, and then they coat it with a layer of fluorocarbon. These lines may or may not have their benefits over monofilament, but my argument to it, because they are more expensive than monofilament, is if you're going to spend the money, you might as well switch to braid and then use a monofilament or fluorocarbon leader. That combination in almost every regard will outperform these more expensive copolymers. Now, the biggest advantage mono has over braid is its abrasion resistance. Monofilament can handle a lot more abrasion than braid. Braid is amazing stuff. It's stronger than steel, but its weakness is its lack of abrasion resistance. So if you're fishing around pilings, bridge pilings, dock pilings, oyster beds, you're fishing in a really rocky area, like if you're fishing in the Pacific Northwest, fishing off those rocks, you got cabezon and lingcod and rockfish trying to get back into the rocks, braid is not going to last for you. Braid is going to get just shredded and destroyed. A 30-pound monofilament can be dragged across more rocks and more, and more rough materials than 60-pound braid. At the same time, that monofilament is a lot cheaper. So when you do drag it across the rocks, you bring it in, you can cut off a length, you go out fishing a couple times, you need to re-spool, it only costs you a couple dollars, whereas the braid, you keep having to pull that off. When you finally go to replace it, it's going to be more expensive to replace. I want to give a quick mention. I don't want to get too far into it. I've actually recorded this several times now, and I just keep talking because I guess it's a whole nother video's worth of information. A great thing to use monofilament on is your older fishing gear. The older gear is not built to handle braid. The braid will eat your line guides. If you use too heavy a braid on a reel, even though it all fits on there, and you're pulling on that, you'll break the reel. The reel is not designed to have that much force put on it. If the reel was built to hold 10 to 15 pound test, it's only designed to withstand, 20 pounds of force. So then you go buy a braid and I can fit 40-pound test on this, and you fill it with 40-pound test and you're happily fishing, and then you get a really big fish, or you even get snagged and you're just pulling really hard. You'll break the reel. You'll collapse the spool, you'll bend stuff. The most common thing that you'll bend is the spindle that the spool sits on. You'll bend that. If you've got old gear that you want to use, or you're fishing in an environment where you don't want to use your nice gear, like fishing off rocks, night fishing in an area like on a really busy pier where people like to walk off with your fishing gear, your older gear like your Penn 309s or your original Penn spin fishers, those are designed to be used with monofilament. So use them with monofilament. One of the blessings and the curses of monofilament is its stretch. Monofilament has more elasticity than any of the current fishing lines. Now, what that means is, if you're fishing off, let's say you're fishing off a boat in 200 feet of water and you're bottom fishing, you've got 200 feet of line between the eye of your rod and your hook, and a fish gets on, and you're using a line that, say, has 20% elasticity. Monofilament can have about 18 to 30% elasticity depending on the line. A fish, you start to feel a fish, you set the hook, your average boat rod is only 5 to 6 feet long. That 8 feet of line you're pulling, or 10 feet of line you're pulling, is not even going to get through all of the elasticity of the monofilament. Like I said, this is a blessing and a curse. So anytime you're fishing with a lot of line out, monofilament's not what you want. That's where you're going to want braid. Another thing that monofilament is very good for is to be used as a top shot or a shock leader. They'll use a good length of monofilament leader attached to their braid, and what that does is they get a big fish that has a big head shake, makes a big powerful run, jumps, shakes, something where there's a sudden force. That monofilament stretches and keeps the line from snapping. It's really impressive how much force one of those big fish can have. They suddenly turn in the water, and how much force they can put on that line. Another time you can do that is throwing big lures or big heavy weights. You cast and you backlash, and you're just using braid to, say, a straight wire leader, or braid and you only have a short monofilament or fluorocarbon leader. You cast your bank fishing, you cast your couple ounce weight, or you're using a big bait, and you cast out, and like I said, you backlash or your bail closes, snap, there it goes, gone, see ya. Using a longer monofilament leader can give you some of that shock absorption, and you won't snap your line on. So that's a very good use for monofilament. There are 3 knots that I use for mono. That's the TRILENE knot, the Palomar knot, and the improved CLINCH knot. The improved CLINCH knot, the only time I use that is if I'm fishing with a really small bait hook, like a size 14 or a size 18, catching little minnows, or a fly. Because of the eye of the hook is so small, a lot of times you can only run the line through the eye once. So that's where I use the improved CLINCH knot. That knot is not as strong as the uni knot or the TRILENE knot. When you're catching minnows, 2-pound test is plenty. So that's not an issue. If the improved CLINCH knot is a 50% knot, meaning there's a 50% strength reduction because of that knot, it's still 1-pound test if you're using 2-pound test. And for minnows or bluegill or whatever, that's fine. This is how you tie the improved CLINCH knot. You run it through, pull out about, again, 4 or 5 inches of line, pinching the line where it comes through the eye, like so, grabbing your main line and wrapping the tag end 5 times around. Now you're going to go back through the eye, or not through the eye, I'm sorry, the loop that we made now at the bottom near the eye. We've gone through, now we have a new loop. Now we run the tag end through that loop. You start to draw it down. Once you get to about here, you're going to wet it. And you're going to seat it. There we go. I've tied this knot for years. This is the first knot. This is the knot my grandfather taught me to use. It's served me quite well. However, It is not as strong as the TRILENE knot. The only time I use the improved clinch knot is when I can't tie the TRILENE knot because I can't run the line through twice, and that's what the TRILENE knot requires. So this is a good knot, but not a great knot. There are better knots, but when you can't run the line through twice, like you have to do with the TRILENE knot or the Palomar, this is the knot to go for when tying on monofilament. I mostly tie the TRILENE knot because it's the knot I'm just personally most comfortable with. It's very strong, and you don't have to loop around the entire lure. So this is a line to thing knot. What I mean is you'll tie it to a thing, a lure, a hook, a swivel, a weight, anything like that. Not a line to line knot. So you'll take your line, you'll run it through, put about 4 to 6 inches of line through. Now see, I'm holding my hook here. You can hold the swivel the same way. And now I'm going to run my line back through the same way I went the first time. I'm not making a granny knot here. I'm only running it through. So now I have this loop. I'm sliding the loop down and pinching the loop there. So I won't let it close all the way around the eye of the hook. So now I've pinched it here. I'm pinching the top of the hook, keeping this from falling or flopping around, and pinching this loop. Now I'll grab my main line in this hand, and then I'll push my tag end around once, twice, 3 times, and 4 times. Now I've created 2 loops here. You can see that in the camera. Yes, you can. I've created 2 loops. I'm going to take my tag end and run it through those 2 loops. And then I'm going to pinch the tag end, and you're going to watch here. The tag end, all these twists up here, the tag end is going to twist around those twists. You're going to see it fold over here as I start to tighten it. You see it start to twist. All right, so this is the point where you wet it. You wet it with saliva. Saliva is actually a very good lubricant. I know it's gross, especially to hear it. I don't like that part on knot videos. But you wet the line with saliva. It's a very good lubricant, and you need that lubricant to tighten, help cinch the knot down, and help it to seat. If you don't use you don't wet it, you'll end up burning the line here, and it'll be all corkscrewed, and you don't want that. You want it to look just like that. You can actually see that it is slightly, it's still just barely has a little bit of fatigue there from tightening it. Seat it down. Give it a good tug. You want to give it a good practice tug to make sure that it's seated right. Once you've practiced this knot a few times, you'll get to know what right looks like, and that is what right looks like. That is a good knot. When you trim your tag end, don't cut it all the way to the knot. Leave yourself about 1/8 of an inch. When you get a really big fish on, or even just a snag, and you're pulling tight, you're pulling, this knot is going to cinch up even more. And this tag end is actually going to get sucked into the knot somewhat. And if you cut it off right at the knot's going to unravel. So if you've been fighting a fish and it suddenly breaks off, and you're reeling line, and the end of your line looks like a little curly cue, you're not unraveled. It didn't snap. It actually just untied. The line got pulled, the tag end got pulled through the knot, and it untied. So always leave yourself that little bit of tag end, and make sure you practiced enough so you know what right looks like. Because if it looks wrong, it is wrong. And I've done that enough times where I'm like, it'll be fine. And sure enough, I lose a fish. And the whole reason you're fishing is to catch fish. So don't do that. Now where the Palomar knot does work really well is when you're using it on a heavy line. And now we'll switch to the close-up. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to take about 6 inches of line and fold it over itself and pinch it where you folded it over. And by really pinching it down there, it's going to actually permanently kink it, but that makes it look more manageable. So if you see it staying in the shape, so you don't have to try to manage that line folded over. You're going to run your line through the pinched line through the eye, bringing a big majority of the loop through, and then you're just going to do a granny knot. You're going to wrap it. It's really hard to do on camera. I'm just going to do a granny knot. So you'll go around your main line, through the loop you just made. This is a lot harder to do on camera than I thought it would be. Snug it down so it's not seated. You don't want to snug it down tightly, but just so it's not loose and moving anywhere. You're going to take your loop and run it over your swivel or your hook or your lure, and you're going to start to tighten it. And this is where I wet it. I'll take it here, wet it, and then pulling the tag end and the main line end, I pull it tight. Pull them both tight equally, and there you go. I usually then give the main line a good tightening. What that does when you pull the main line is it seats the knot correctly in the right I don't know how you say that, the right configuration, leaving a little bit of main line or a little bit of tag end again, just like the TRILENE knot. There is your uni knot. This is a great knot. It's easy to tie, but somehow still I often will have it where it doesn't seat quite right. I actually haven't quite figured out why that is, especially when you're using heavier lines. It can sometimes not seat right, so if it looks wrong, just redo it. What I don't like about it is this knot is you end up with a lot of tag end. And the other thing I don't like is imagine trying to loop that around a big lure, like doing that with a spinnerbait. How annoying is that? Especially if you've got like a trailer hook and other stuff. So I don't use this a lot, but when I use it, it's usually for tying heavier monofilament leaders or fluorocarbon leaders. The uni knot works much better with heavy lines because heavy lines do not like to be twisted, and you can actually dam it when you're trying to cinch the knot down. It damages the line and you can end up with a curly cue. It can be uneven, all kinds of things. So I use the TRILENE knot for up to about 40 to 40 pound test. Past that, I try to use the uni knot. The 150 pound test that I use for Wells catfish and some ocean fish is really too thick for knots. You use a crimp, and what these do, you run the line through the crimp, put your hook or swivel or whatever you're using on, then run it back through the crimp, and then you crimp it. One of the really nice benefits of that is your hook or your swivel has play in the end of that loop, so that's nice. All right, guys, let's recap. Monofilament is the do almost anything line. It's cheap. You don't need a leader material. It's not as dangerous to use as braid. So it's great for kids. Tying knots is easy, so it's great for beginners. You can use it on your old gear, so you don't have to invest in an entirely new system. It's good for monofilament's good for topwater fishing. It's good for float fishing. It's like I said, a main line and leader all in one. And it's easier to untangle than braid, and it's less dangerous than braid. All in all, it's a very good product that I hardly ever use. We'll get into more of why that is later. I will do a quick mention that I am a huge fan of two monofilaments. I'm a huge fan of TRILENE Big Game and Suffix Superior. This is monofilament, but it's monofilament leader material. Suffix Superior and the cost compared to fluorocarbon, this stuff is very good. For a mainline, I like, and I also use this for leader material, but for mainline, I really like the TRILENE Big Game. There's a great article that somebody recently did. It was either an article or a YouTube video that I watched a little while ago, and they compared all these lines and all these there's new monofilaments too. Of course, with monofilaments, with all these lines, there's a lot of marketing involved, and that's where I think we have to get through that muddied water to find out what's actually effective. He went and did all these tests, and he found that TRILENE Big Game, and I believe it might be Stren, I don't remember. There was another one of these old school original lines were actually better or just as good or just infinitesimally less good than these lines that cost significantly more. So that's a tough one. It's not something you should poo-poo just because it's the cheapest option. Like I said, there are a lot of times and places where it's the best option. So yay, it's the cheapest at the same time. All right, in our next video, we're talking about braid. Yay! I use this stuff more than monofilament. After that, we'll be talking about fluorocarbon. Interesting things about, so I've been learning some interesting things about fluorocarbon, and I'm gonna have to do some more research because I just watched a video last night that kind of put everything I was thinking about fluorocarbon on its nose.